This week, we actually had the final reveal of FSR Redstone, the suite of machine learning technologies that AMD is creating for its new era of gaming. Starts on RDNA 4, obviously is going to move into sort of top gear with RDNA 5 going forwards based on what we know about that technology. What we saw this week was essentially a reveal of the machine learning-based frame generation technique that has been added to the suite of Redstone services. And we've only just started to take a look at this. Unfortunately, I was just looking at the when it actually was arrived. If we were going to get that content out on time, we would have had to work on the weekend. And
yeah,
that's just not really the way we do things here anymore. If we can help it.
Yeah, it's a shame. I really wish that we got this earlier, but because especially hats off to Hardware Unboxed here. I'm pretty sure they did work the weekend, and I feel for them as a result of that. But they came out with a video that covers all the bases in a wonderful way, including going an extra step that I think, it requires a hardware investment that is kind of costly.
If it's worth doing, it's worth doing, right?
Yeah. They point 1,000 FPS camera at the screen. So the big issue with pointing a camera at a screen, and this is not saying their work isn't good, is that getting the human eye even to look like a camera, we still perceive things differently than the camera does, which is especially when you put it back on a screen afterwards. But the reason why they use it is because they can show the fact, like the video is titled very well about how frame times in FSR's frame gen solution are just not consistent across titles. And they show it very well without even having to bring up a frame time graph, which is there's a disconnect in the audience there as soon as you show a frame time graph, when a lot of people just play games with, full frames, full frame tearing and stuff like that. You have an audience that is maybe not perceptive to frame time issues, but if you show it in a slowed down way next to or back to back with the ideal scenario, the more ideal scenario, like they did in their video, you get to see the issue. And for me, this Redstone release is a little bit awkward, and I do wonder why it came out at the time it did, because Hub's video very specifically does point out, and here's some video that I've sent to Oliver of side-by-side FSR 4 frame gen versus FSR 3 frame gen, and you'll look at the shadows here on the ground. You'll see that it is due to the fact that it isn't fully reliant on just motion vector data for generating frames, that it can have like a better sense of 3D elements or 2D elements that lack motion vectors, and the shadows look better in movement. And there's going to probably be other things that you'll see that will look better depending upon your scene, because I would say FSR 3 frame generation was quite low quality, but it was strobing every other frame. So that wasn't, that's not the big issue. Strobing every other frame makes actually, you have a greater tolerance and forgiveness for issues in how a frame is rendered or put together at that point, because the persistence is so low and it's persisting next to what is supposed to be an ideal perfect frame. And that mix makes a really great subjective experience, presuming that the frame pacing is right, because that is the issue in the Hub video. And that here's some footage I sent to Oliver. This is FCAT captured footage at 4K 120 FPS in a game called Industria 2, which will be coming out, I believe, next year. You can upgrade that to FSR 4 MLFG via the driver. And just, turning the camera here in a completely empty room, it's getting around 120 FPS. But there's two really great things to point out, is that I'd say this is the worst example that you could probably find out there, one of the worst examples, where the average frame time is going to look like a near 120 FPS experience, but the actual frame to frame times are very different. One is kicking up maybe into the 4 millisecond region, while the other one's going to the 12 millisecond region. So the average is around 8 milliseconds, but the frame to frame difference makes it almost not look like 120 FPS at all in terms of smoothness. But you also see something that Hub talked about in their video, where basically Tim said like, oh, and look at that, there's a frame tear. And that's very interesting because you usually don't expect frame tearing with VRR. But if you're running it with an unlocked non-VSynced frame rate, frame tearing occurs when you go above the refresh rate of the panel. And that is what you're seeing. You're seeing extreme runt frames the phraseology came around in the multi-GPU days, where it's like a tiny little frame that is barely shown. It's scanned out really briefly, and it's probably maybe 20 pixels tall, and it looks like a really big tear in the image. And that's what you're actually seeing. And it's when we FCAT it, you can see that they're actually like 1 or 2 millisecond frame times at that point. And they're very, very small. That frame time graph there looks really ugly, but then you compare it to, here's MLFG turned off. This game is a little weird. It only allows you to run TSR without frame generation on. So this is actually using Unreal's TSR here, but at 50% internal resolution from 4K. And you'll see that frame timeline, although half the frame rate, is markedly smoother. In fact, it's perfect. It's just pure GPU limited goodness. And it also subjectively on a VRR panel, this looks way better. And I feel like when my content about this comes out, I'm also like Hub here. I do actually want to focus on the frame time stuff because I feel like it is the core issue, and I feel like it is something that could be fixed over time. A little surprised it hasn't been fixed yet completely, but I feel like this is the core issue right now. MLFG, the quality wins are going to be there. We've seen it proven already by NVIDIA and Intel, but getting the frame pacing right is actually probably the biggest issue. And I hope that our content, both Hubs, ours, and anyone else who covers that, user reports, can push AMD to make sure that not just a select grouping of games under ideal conditions always has really great frame pacing, but also under more trying conditions, every game, no matter what, only with like a few exceptions. We also see exceptions occurring with DLSS 4 or 3 frame generation occasionally, where I've like pointed out in a game like Reflex causes this game to stutter. I've said that before. I think Dying Light the Beast at launch, for example. So like it doesn't need to be perfect 100% of the time, but so far I would say a lot more consistent than Hub looked at a lot of titles here, really. I'm sorry that I'm referencing Hub so much, but they did such a good job.
Yeah, I think when the embargo lifted, I looked at Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed, and because why not? And you got to sort of tip of the hat to Tim there, because the work on Hardware Unboxed was just, I'd say, borderline definitive.
Yeah, it was. It puts into question me even working on something.
Yes, I know. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
The 1000 FPS camera work, excellent. The fact that he was picking up the stuff that you're showing in terms of your frame time data, which entirely corroborates it. When you see those on your content, when you see those spikes up to close to the 0 millisecond line, it's like ultimate runt frame territory. That will present as a big tear on the screen, because the frame time is so short, it will be moving out of the VRR window, which is why that screen tearing is there. But you're looking at the sort of 120 frames per second average there, but for most people, I suspect it will look like a VSync presentation, because you're mostly ping-ponging between 8 and 16 milliseconds.
True that.
So it doesn't even look like VRR at that point. And then you'll have your mega spikes to 0 milliseconds or close to it. And then you'll go straight down to like 16 milliseconds, which, that's crazy stuff there. Work needs to be done there, clearly. So I do wonder how that got out, to be honest, because the stuff that Tim was showing with the camera work is... Here's the thing, like when you're making a YouTube video, the whole limitations imposed by the media that we're using, streaming, means that you need to come up with a technique like this to show how bad it is, because the actual real world experience, you will see it, but you'll see it in a different way. And YouTube doesn't really have the temporal resolution to show high refresh rate experiences in the same way. And obviously the audience are probably, vast majority of them are probably working from 60 hertz displays anyway. So you've got to kind of have techniques like that. But it should have been like immediately obvious and visible. So yeah, that's kind of weird. I mean, in terms of you using an overlay technique there, AMD is still saying you shouldn't use overlays with frame generation.
Which I just got to start disagreeing with them there. Like a lot of PC users will run overlays. Windows will run overlays on your game without you knowing it. The game bar, you may have your Radeon overlay open and whatnot, and Steam you can run an overlay. These are all things that are very common to PC gaming, and I feel like it isn't a great excuse for a robust product to say, don't use your computer the way you usually would to a lot of your users, and instead they should have, if NVIDIA can make a robust enough one that runs with overlays, then that's not the issue though. Tim shows all this stuff without overlays, and my FCAT footage, by the way, is just an FCAT bar. There is no overlay running there. It's all the overlays are completely turned off. It's just an FCAT running. If people don't know that, it's a colored little thing on the left-hand side of the screen that is picked up to measure frame times. And that should be light enough weight because FCAT was developed in 2012 to run on GPUs from that time that did not have hardware pacing or Windows explicit pacing. It was really Wild West at that point. So I feel like that those aren't very good excuses.
Right. I think the other thing, of course, is that when we presented some stuff to AMD showing these wacky frame times, this was like during the analytical FSR 3.1 release, they said, don't use an overlay. So we used our console tear detection tools without any overlay at all and got the same result. So I don't think the overlay actually has any impact whatsoever. I think this is maybe just a kind of a conservative thing that they're mentioning just to make sure it's running in the same way that they tested it. But yeah, it didn't have any impact at all. On a more sort of general level, I'm a bit disappointed with Redstone so far. Obviously, the ray regeneration stuff that we saw kind of hit and miss. Wasn't the kind of holistic solution that NVIDIA is aiming for. I mean, ray reconstruction is still a work in progress, really, isn't it, Alex? But it's significantly a step beyond in certain respects. But, it showed promise. FSR4 upscaling is kind of now being included into the Redstone package. I think that's pretty cool. I don't really think, I think AMD has kind of cracked it there, which I think is great news. The Radiance caching, still work in progress. They showed a demo, right? But we haven't got any releases to look at.
Yeah, no announced date even for that. That was in Darktide, Warhammer 40k Darktide. And that would be interesting to see how they implement it, because Warhammer 40k Darktide uses RTX GI, which is probe-based RTGI solution. And the cache there are the probes spread out through the world that are doing multiple traces per frame, and then that's how you're getting multi-bounce over frames, kind of like amortized together. And I'm very curious to see what theirs is in comparison and whether or not it has a dramatic fidelity differences, for example, because it's presumably a completely different cache. But we don't know a lot about that technology yet, so we have to wait and see. But one thing that I do like about when NVIDIA does debut new technologies since probably DLSS 2 is that they have a lot of in-game examples already for users to check out, usually around the release date. And here we still really only have ray regen in one title where it's pretty hard to use and pretty hard to appreciate.
A couple of final points before I hand over to Oliver is that, first of all, there's a reason why Redstone exists, and there's a reason why Intel and NVIDIA are pursuing machine learning-based features, and you're not going to like the reason. The reason why is really, really simple. Mark Cerny has basically all out said that the future of GPU technology and advances in graphics isn't going to come from stacking up compute units or shaders. It's going to come from a more holistic use of hardware and software. That does mean technologies like frame generation. It is going to become, much more prevalent. I think we've reached with DLSS super resolution and I think FSR4 a point where those features are now accepted as being a part of the mix. Generally, users like to use those features. And I think we're going to reach the point at some point in the future where frame generation will reach the same quality threshold, where it is going to be, the latency situation will probably be nullified. The hit to latency will probably be nullified at some point. The quality will increase. And that, at that point, if you can't tell the difference between that and an actual natively rendered frame, I'd say kind of, job done almost. But that is basically the way that the future of technology is heading, because those process nodes are getting ever more expensive. And in order to get your quote unquote performance increases, which currently I describe as a frame rate increase, we will be seeing technologies like this. They'll just get better and better to the point where you probably won't be able to tell the difference versus native. That's my thought on that. My second point, which I'm going to say it's a disappointment, FSR 4 Int 8. I was expecting a kind of one more thing at the end of the presentation to say, hey, look, we know there's a lot of RDNA 3 and a lot of RDNA 2 GPUs out there. We have got a fallback solution for you guys and we will distribute it. That wasn't there. That's disappointing. We know it exists. We know it works. What's the problem? Oliver, what's your thought on all of this?
I mean, the frame pacing issues do seem legitimately very poor. They're really reticent to try this. The Redstone implementation so far seems very limited. Obviously, it's quite a muted launch. I mean, there's very few new technologies in the mix that are actually shipping in games. It seems like the main focus is that frame generation technology. We don't have too much utility for the ray regeneration at the moment in various titles. So that's unfortunate. No RDNA 3 support, no RDNA 2 support, like you mentioned, Rich. That's not good for an incredible volume of RDNA 2 and RDNA 3 parts, some of which are still being sold today, as we've touched on many times. One detail you guys didn't touch on, though, is that they're renaming FSR 4 to just FSR. I don't know if that's such a good thing. Yeah, they're renaming FSR 4 to FSR, just flat out FSR. I don't know if Alex is going to like that, but it does seem to
I don't even know how I talk about it in videos at that point. I guess I just have to say something else than the official name because it's confusing.
Just AMD FSR. That's their new nomenclature for, I guess, FSR going forward, and you'll just drop in whatever version, override whatever version. That'll be how it has to go.
Okay, sure. Okay.
I mean, at least NVIDIA is pretty clear about like DLSS 4, here's a suite of technologies, here's a version number, here's something you can really attach yourself to. With AMD, it's going to be, I don't even know how they're going to denote version numbers from this point onwards. It's just FSR.
Right. I don't think they actually need to deploy the full FSR Redstone feature set to those older GPUs. I think it's perfectly fine to actually have some level of delineation, but it would put them at a disadvantage against NVIDIA, who've done a pretty good job, I think, of delineating across the generations what you get and still providing some love to like 20 and 30 series owners. I think that's pretty good.
Right.
Yeah, but the fact that we know that FSR 4 Int 8 exists, and then no word on whether those older GPUs are going to get a new lease of life by giving it to them when we know it exists. It's kind of a bit rough, I thought. Yeah. I guess, though, as is the case, we could just have to wait and see how all of this evolves over time. I honestly think that the way things are going at the moment, this is probably going to become much more important to AMD when RDNA 5 comes around, which does seem to be a more holistic approach to just graphics rendering in general, which does align more closely with what NVIDIA have been doing. Yeah, so I guess they've got a sort of certain period of time in order to get this right. But, the fact that these frame pacing issues didn't get noticed, that's not a good early indicator, right?